We are at Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design at King's Cross in London, which is part of the University of Arts London, to talk to the charismatic Chief Executive and Vice Chancellor of the University, Nigel Carrington. Let's have a chat with Nigel Carrington and get his vision of an arts leader. Nigel, thank you. Thank you for being on the program. It's a great pleasure to talk to you. Nigel, I would like to begin with a quote from Buddha, the great philosopher, my favorite philosopher, and see how that resonates with you in relation to art. Buddha said, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." Nigel, how does that feel?
That resonates very well with me. St. Augustine also said that man is memory. Man is made of memories, something like that. And I think that we have a challenge as artists and as creatives in explaining how important what comes out of art is in making us human. And I think that's one of the great challenges of the 21st century. It's avoiding going back into very sort of entrenched emotional states and continuing to look openly with vision at the world as individuals as well as collectively. There is no doubt that to have a personally fulfilling life, one must tap into one's emotions. And we tap into our emotions in a way through our memories and through our ability to look optimistically at the future. So you've got Buddha and you've got St. Augustine, actually.
All saying the same thing.
So really saying the same thing. And I, having had a life as a lawyer and as a businessman, really, had always had a strong desire to tap into something that gave me more fulfillment in my life, and
but
I appreciated that.
Before we talk about you, shall we narrow down what art really means? Because there's a huge difference of interpretation on what art comprises.
Yes.
And so tell us in your words what art represents.
Well, most people would think of art really as the picture on the wall, the painting. Maybe they think of the arts and they think of music and they think of literature. But they're all much more than superficial individual experiences. They're all ways of tapping into what makes you human. And actually, if we think about things that people seek to do when they're not working in the 21st century, they're looking to tap into their emotions. They will, if they are unfortunate enough to have a boring job, they will be thinking about, well, what will give me satisfaction? The rise of going to museums and galleries is part of that. It's seeking an emotional connection. The desire to buy really exciting fashion is really about expressing yourself through fashion. And what our students do is not just paint pictures. They have a state of mind, a frame of mind that enables them to look at the world differently So we might start from the proposition that that an artist has a particular way of expressing themselves, but what we're trying to do with our students and what we think we need to do with society is to take that fundamental appreciation of the emotion and then convert it into something that's also really helping one's colleagues, one's friends, and hopefully society as a whole.
So really what you're saying is art is about creativity. Is that what you're saying? You know, the thoughts that Buddha talked about,
Yeah.
you know, and with your thoughts you make the world, as it were. So is creativity something which is innate, or is it something that you can teach, or is it some sort of spiritual experience? Because
actually, it's probably all three. I would like to think that it's innate in some way in almost everybody.
so it
You
exists for everybody.
wouldn't need universities teaching art and design unless there was some fundamental basic instinct or interest or passion that you were releasing from individuals.
Very well put.
And I think a lot of people who are very creative are not necessarily artists, but they can still be creative. But somehow the processes we use as creative people are processes that allow us to look beyond our everyday existence. So
The extraordinary.
the extraordinary, or at least the different. Something that moves one on. And going back to your point about imagination, it moves us on from where we are to somewhere we'd like to be. Of course, it might be fear, but we would hope that as creatives we're creating.
I think
optimism.
you said in one of your lectures that we tend to default when you're thinking. In other words, the creative process itself is not, in a sense, natural. You have to discipline people to begin to not come back to what you know.
That's absolutely
Is that
right.
correct? And if so, how do you teach your students, as it were, to understand that concept? How do you train them, even if they have something innate in them? How do you train them not to go to default?
Well, we would say we don't train them, actually.
Okay.
I mean, there are different ways in which people seek to teach creativity. We would say that we help them to unlock their creativity rather than train them, because training implies that you're on a path which is leading to a certain destination, and actually truly creative people don't quite know where they're going. So what we're trying to do with our students is give them the ability to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, to take away the fear that moving yourself outside your comfort zone is somehow a disabling and frightening process. So really successful creative people are not frightened. They're able to push the boundaries. Of course, it is uncomfortable, but you can be comfortable being uncomfortable. You can try to change things, but you must be confident that you will fail more often than you'll succeed. So our training, just to finish the thought, is in that sense is unlocking people's willingness to fail and giving them the sense that if they push the boundaries almost all the time, eventually they'll push a boundary over to a better world, to a more imaginatively fulfilling world. Actually not an imagination, but a reality that is different or better for society or indeed better for industry.
So really you're saying that unless you take a risk, you can't venture into the new, if you like.
Yes.
But you know, with risks, the problem with risks is that you can be creative, you may succeed in being creative, but actually it could be damaging to humanity in the long run. And because everything which is unique, in the sense, is creative.
That's
I
true.
mean, maybe the atom bomb, I don't know.
Yes.
But what I'm
very
saying is,
creative,
how
unfortunately.
do you guide your students? And it's a really important point that if they are taking risks, if they are breaking boundaries, how careful are they about humanity and its impact? We look at plastics, for example, good example. That was an innovative process, yet the destruction that has caused has been supreme, isn't it? So there's a sense of responsibility here, isn't there?
There's a sense of responsibility, and I think people who are drawn to studying the creative impulse, if you like, are generally speaking, tend to want a personal fulfillment. And I do believe that most individuals are largely good. I think most people will, absent horrible experiences in their lives, most people will tend to the positive in their lives. Because being human is about seeking a positive state. I really believe that most people do have a good and positive streak. Of course, the responsibility of any environment, whether it's a university or a society, is to try to inculcate and support what is good in people and what is positive about the future. And successful societies generally have a core of goodness about them. So we would, I think our students generally share a certain set of values, but we certainly are not frightened about expressing values like diversity. That's one of the great values, if you like, of the university. The concern for the planet actually is tapped into by most young people now. So that forms another of our values, and those values underpin how we teach. And if we share those values, not impose them, not to train people to have those values, but share them and encourage them to emerge in the creative process, then I would say we have a very, very, very powerful role in the world.
I think doing my own research and before this chat with you, Nigel, I realized there are two very strong messages coming through from your university. One was, of course, creativity, and the other one was sustainability. And that's really what we're talking about, being sustainable, being kind to the universe in what you do. But before we go there, I'd like to ask you, again, a quote from one of my favorite people, Leonardo da Vinci. And he said, "Where the spirit does not work with the hand, there is no art." Now, I think whilst we say things are innate, but we have to, an artistic person needs to be emotionally charged to get into a zone where he or she can express themselves, come up with those creative ideas. What is your view on this quote?
It's a really interesting question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. One of the challenges of being in these creative environments is you don't know all the answers when you start. But I would say that that idea that you communicate with your being through your hands and through a sense of touch is still very true. And one of the very interesting characteristics of our students is that they come in usually now with incredibly sophisticated digital skills. A lot of them are learning coding at school, and they are living in a world which is very digital and very electronic and not a tactile, haptic world. The very interesting thing that happens when they come to a university like this, where we use the power of digital creativity, of course, to enhance the way our students communicate, is that they will tend, when they arrive, to make a beeline for equipment which is about touch and which is about being able personally to manipulate haptic processes. So, for instance, we have the most wonderful collections of old print letterpress. It's fundamental, obviously, to design prior to the digital age. And it's extraordinary how many students will come in and want to put cold type together on a press, because it changes the way they think about the words and the look of the words and the feel of the words. And there is a very distinctive difference between something that's been printed on an old press and anything you can create digitally at the moment.
It's a real feel about it.
So I think it was Steve Jobs actually who talked about the fact that he wasn't a great technician. He studied calligraphy as one of his courses at university. He was obsessed with the way things looked and how they felt. So, the iPhone is not just about what it looks like or what it does for you technically, it's absolutely about what you feel. And one of the interesting things and some manifestations of that is that we have a particular corporate supporter, a wonderful corporate supporter, which is in that digital space producing hardware for digital objects, but they are interested in recruiting our fashion students. Because fashion is all about how you express a feeling and an emotion, and what something feels like as much as what it actually does functionally. So I think bringing those two together is so important still. It's not just about working in the digital space.
I was actually, I agree entirely, very good sort of illustration about the touchy feel. And I was really leaning towards how do you get into that zone, and leaving the students aside for a minute. For example, in Eastern philosophy, meditation and mindfulness allows you to focus and to be creative. Is that something that you want to, as Chancellor, as Vice Chancellor, Chief Executive, want to pass on to your students? Is it great?
I think it's extraordinarily important. Of course,
to enhance the creative process.
The challenge, I'm sure, and I know that this is very important to you, the challenge is that when your head is buzzing with ideas, stopping to think and reflect is extremely important, and it's finding space in the world to do that. But I absolutely agree, and there's a growing movement for happiness, which involves stopping to reflect on what makes you happy, not looking at a screen, but actually what really makes you happy. So yes, do we do it as well as we should? Probably not, but we have a very short time with our students when they're here.
Perhaps you would introduce
that. Perhaps we will.
I think that would be useful.
Now, and actually, I mean, the truth is, of course, we do, and we have a lot of courses. Our student union will be running courses for students which are about helping them to relax. But the pressures are also huge these days. And
however, it creates a great deal of efficiency and focus and new ideas.
I'm sure.
I know that projecting what your university does, the University of the Arts, is quite difficult because most people can see or want a connection between cause and effect. People can recognize what a solicitor does or what an accountant does. But so you have a bit of a problem in communicating this philosophy, this creativeness, this idea, this actually, I would say, an outstanding contribution that human beings can make. Do you want to say anything about that, Nigel?
Well, I think universities, education from schools through to universities, have a huge responsibility to express the importance of creativity. And unfortunately, we're in a world which clamours for a whole range of different specific things. So, some governments are very, very, very fixated on science and technology and engineering and maths, as if art and creativity sit in one box and science and technology sit in another. And I think it's incumbent on us, and it's why I love talking about creativity, is to explain how they come together and why they're just inextricably linked. They're not living in different worlds. And many of the most successful scientists have a very, very strong creative streak, because putting the two together is absolutely powerful. I don't think anyone in education, in art and design education, would say, if you teach art and design, you don't need to worry about anything else. But if you don't teach art and design and you don't release the creative impulse, I think it's a terrible risk.
I can totally see the relevance of being able to think differently, to be able to think creatively. And that works for every profession, for every walk of life, even for life.
Yes.
Now, you also do some amazing work at UL. For example, you have the Textiles Futures Research Center. Are you doing anything on this plastics and these problems about pollution?
Yes.
Is there any sustainable?
So if you go back to the values issue, because sustainability and the future of the planet, because our students have that imagination, is so important to them, then the concern about the way we design things and the impact of that design on the future is absolutely fundamental to what we do across so many different elements of our work. So the fashion industry is the biggest pollutant on the planet. And so how we make clothes and how we consume clothes and how we discard clothes is fundamental. So our students are not just thinking about how do we make things, they're thinking about what happens when you've got bored with them. Do they just go into landfill?
And how they can improve.
Yes. So our students are, a lot of our students are also interacting with scientists and designers, and they have a huge hunger to understand other disciplines. And so, as you'll see when you speak to our students, a lot of them are applying design principles to issues for the planet in a way that we would hope would change the way we consume. So it's not so much, it's partly redesigning a product so that it doesn't create so much pollution when you dispose of it, but it's also partly redesigning the process of consumption in a way that reduces the extent to which we actually throw things away. So our students, we have wonderful courses in which students will be specifically addressing those issues, starting from the point of their creativity, but then applying their creativity to other disciplines and what's happening in other disciplines. You know, maybe the way we design cars, it may be the way we design clothes, maybe the way we devise new materials. So a number of our students work with scientists on materials that will just biodegrade instead of.
That would change the world.
That would change the world.
The oceans and the sea life.
And interestingly, industry is not disinterested in that. It's not necessarily just interested in profit. If as a fashion brand you can convince your consumers who have these values that you believe in those values and you're selling them a product which fulfills their emotional needs for the future, then you have a fabulous product. So that becomes embedded in many of the projects that our students do. So
how far are we on eliminating plastics?
I'm in a very long way away, unfortunately.
Really?
A very long way away. Okay. Just as we're not even sure whether we can stop climate change anymore.
But I was going to ask you about something you mentioned in one of your lectures, which I thought was really profound. You said climate change in the context of how emotions distort logical reasoning. I thought that was a sixer, really. Now, you said certain things. I'd like you to explain what you're saying, that our embedded beliefs are difficult to dislodge. So say what you said in your lecture.
It is often very hard, by rational argument, to change a belief, precisely because beliefs are something that's been influenced by the emotion.
It's a bit more
so
fundamental.
They will rebel against each other. But once you've embedded a belief, it's very hard to change a belief. But you're usually not going to be able to change a belief simply by rational argument. I mean, I think rationally, all of the respectable science says climate change is going to destroy our planet and is caused by human action. There are still plenty of people who do not accept that. I don't believe that we're likely to change people's minds by simply giving them more scientific papers. But we will have photographers who will go to the Arctic Circle and film the consequences and communicate, often in very clever ways, in the way they set people against the environment in their art, who in an emotional response to a scientific issue have the power to change the way we actually look at a problem which is just not going to be necessarily resolved through rational thought.
So an emotional problem, in a sense, can only be changed by an emotional impact. That's really what
I would say that's right. And once you've embedded a particular belief in your mind, it's not just going to go away through rational arguments.
Another topic which is so fundamental in human life is mental health.
Yes.
And again, there's a move that arts and health is using art as a therapeutic tool to change and improve mental health. Have you a view on this, Nigel? And how is the university working on this?
I think across the younger generations, actually in many societies, certainly in the UK, but in many other cultures, the pressures that are, the number of inputs that young people receive now, particularly because of the rather sort of abstract digital world in which they live, mean that they become very confused. And
too much information.
Too many expectations, too much sense that you have to be really wonderful in the way you curate and express your life. They want to express their lives. They have the tools in which to express their lives in a positive way, because you can control what you say about yourself in social media, for instance. But you know in your heart of heart that it's not that simple. But it's very hard then when you see your friends having an apparently wonderful life to feel that you're having as successful a life as they are. And I think there is undoubtedly a major role for the arts in helping us to tap back into real values and to understand that being human is ambiguous, and we have to develop a tolerance for ambiguity. Now, what we teach and the way we teach it is precisely designed to help people to develop a tolerance for ambiguity. Going back to the point about failing, you must be able to fail. One of the highest suicide rates amongst young people in the world is in Korea. It's a culture that is built around not failing, and it's also one of the biggest challenges acknowledged by those in power in Korea, that they have to help young people to be able to accept failure. And accepting imperfection, and accepting failure is something you have to do in relation to social media, because you are not going to be able to look as good as some of your friends. And so the whole purpose, in a sense, for creative education is to develop that tolerance for ambiguity, which wasn't there when I was young. You know, we had an idea of a career. You wanted to be a tax accountant. I wanted to be a lawyer. It was very, very straightforward. There was a tram line. We could follow the tram line, and if we were successful in our tram line, we would be fulfilled. That was the theory of it. It's not that simple, of course. But now it's much more complicated, and the world is much more ambiguous. And I do believe that we're not going to solve the world's problems by saying you've got to be better. We're going to solve the world's problems by saying it is acceptable to fail. Indeed, it is noble to fail, as long as
you're trying,
you can keep moving forward. And I think this mental health issues in some cases arise because people just feel they can't move forward anymore.
Now, Nigel, you talked so much about the arts, but I like to talk about you. And the great philosopher Rumi said, "Live where you fear to live." Now, from one of the top jobs in the international law firm Baker McKenzie, that's where you reached, and then decided to change course completely and joined and became, I think, the managing director of the McLaren Group, which makes amazing motor cars. And then something happened to you. You went back to university at Oxford to study art history, and then now Vice Chancellor and Chief Executive of the University of the Arts. What next, Nigel, and what are you really seeking?
What next? I love what I do, and I'm certainly happiest in the creative world. There's no question. That for me has been that's probably what, without knowing, I was trying to find. And I think all the worlds I previously worked in are also creative, of course. I particularly enjoy being with academics with that very challenging creative frame of mind, and with students who are the future of the world, and being in a university that is producing, nurturing young people who are the next generations of the world is, I think, pretty critically important. Of course, one wants to be personally happy. I'm lucky enough to have a very fulfilling life. But I don't plan my future, and I never have. I've just followed instincts that I need to do something else because there's something else to be done still. And I hope that continues to be the way in which I drive my life. You would say you shouldn't drive your life.
I'm not saying anything.
Just let it
I'm
happen.
not saying anything.
But I mean, that is.
I'm not saying anything. What I would like to ask you, only just to summarize and conclude our amazing discussion, is again going back to one of your lectures, and I'd like you just to summarize the ending. You ask yourself the question, what has art got to do with anything? So if you'd like to answer that question, and then...
Well, I think I said in that lecture, art's not a picture on a wall, it's a frame of mind, I think. And that's certainly what I feel. That's the sense of it. It's that art is a window to something else, and it happens to be one way of developing another way of looking at the world.
A better way of looking.
And the frame of mind that comes from, and I don't just mean painting, I mean from music, from literature, from poetry. The frame of mind, it has the ability to transport people almost magically from the present to the future, or to an aspiration for the future. And that's what creativity is about. It's about having an aspiration for the future and having a sense that although things may be appear closed at the moment, we could look at what's happening in the United States, frankly, and you might say, well, how are we going to escape from this very unhappy situation, this very polarized way of looking at the world and indeed society. I think most creative people would say, we're going to do that by imagining the future. and of course, because creative people want to imagine the future, they're also threats to authoritarian regimes. And authoritarian regimes don't like creative people because they have the capacity to project another potential world. And then the question is, are the values of the individuals such that being projected forward to that potential world, they want to go there? So it's the narrative ability of creative people that's so frightening to authoritarian regimes or intolerant regimes. And that's why we're so important. And that's why I think what we do here is so terribly important for the world.
Well, Nigel, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Buddha said, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world.
I would say that if we are what we think, I would say that the role of a designer is to think about what will be in the future.
Today, despite a lot of innovation through laptops, smartphone, we are still using screen as a primary way of interacting. So on this one, we can see that there is a trend on new ways of interacting with voice control, gesture control. And I want to see how we can bring physicality in this digital world. So on my work, I'm looking at the sound, how you can have a feedback from the sound. For the blind person, for example, I was thinking about soundscape and how you can locate yourself just with sound.
Oh, very good.
And the thing is, I'm thinking about the blind users, but also about the general users, because my point is, if there is something that can help the blind people, I don't know why it couldn't help a sighted person.
Yeah, I think creativity is the opportunity to look outside the box or to look at the future that everyone else has imagined and to rethink it. So I think it's a way to bring positivity as well to your own future. You can look at like the way you want the world to be instead of the way the world is or appears to be. And through your own, or at least that's how I feel with my own work, try to make a difference.
So I think your project is on biofacture.
Yes.
And that is trying to change the world, given what we're dealing with plastics and the pollution that's being caused. Is this where you're going with your project?
That's where I'm hoping to go with it. I mean, obviously with biotech, you have the positive and the negative, and there's a lot of artists and designers looking at both sides of that. I've chosen to look at the positive side of it and show people that there is another way, because I think sometimes when you look at the news and the microplastic pollution and all of these horrible sustainability issues, it can be a bit daunting, and it's what can I really do? And you look at naturals and it just feels like it's not good enough. So I'm trying to show that nature can be really technical and it can maybe solve our problems. We just have to work together and find a way.
I'm looking at sort of collaborating between us and microorganisms. So I'm looking at not just what the materials that can be grown by fungi and bacteria, but looking at the future of how we can work with them and understand how they grow and how they live to better make things for our everyday lives.
Well, with regards to your Buddha quote as well, the link between that and creativity is, I suppose, if I mean, art is often very, very visual and very, very physical, and it's manifested around us. So I feel that if people's thoughts are being, like the thoughts of the artists are being translated in that physical way, then we're almost surrounded by people's thoughts when we're surrounded by art, and that can really impact, I guess, the way an entire, like I'm thinking of it in more spatial architectural terms, the way a society can feel, because you're living surrounded by designs that you don't really even think about. So I suppose in terms of creativity, that's my opinion, and that's why I think it's so important to incorporate a deeper understanding of people's needs when designing a space, I guess. Yeah. My project in particular looks at the buffer zone region of Cyprus. So the strip of land that was established after the 1974 invasion, and nobody has been able to enter that strip of land for about 45 years since. So it's all preserved in this state of decay and warfare. And when I was growing up on the island, because I'm part Cypriot, I felt that a lot of that very stagnant, frozen land kind of mirrored the preserved prejudices between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. Well, my proposal is an installation, a poetry installation, because I'm a poet by practice. So I would like to propose the installation of physical poems engraved perhaps inside the buffer zone, which cannot be physically accessed, but they can be read on a digital map of the buffer zone from the outside at the checkpoint.
Metadata really is like information about information, data about data, and the reason they're interested in this is because that's what creates the mobility, the circulation, the migration of objects, and in a sense creates the cultural life of places.
We are one of 6 colleges within the University Arts London. Ours, Central St Martin's, is probably the most diverse disciplinary of all of the colleges. We have 9 disciplinary programs, and probably fashion is the most well known of these programs, but going on at the same time are really interesting things in fine art, very interesting things in product design, graphic communication design, and the other disciplines.
Tell me a little bit about your research program.
Yeah, we have several very interesting research units here. The Textile Futures research unit came from our Material Futures course, MA Material Futures, which is really taking things, looking at what they can do now and thinking about the possibilities for their future.
So really much of your students' thinking is on sustainability. Is that
Sustainability is always a part of every course and every student's thinking.
One of